with Netgear Kidney International. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We have a really exciting topic, and I hope that you get a lot out of this. We are joined by Dr. Laura Mariani from the University of Michigan, and Amanda, who is a nephrotic syndrome patient who has participated in a trial. So she's going to share some of her experience with us, and Dr. Mariani is going to go over everything you could possibly want to know about clinical trials that we can fit into an hour. So let me know if you have any questions. You can raise your hand, and sorry, let me just show my screen real quick. There we go. Raise your hand. You can type a question in the box, and we will be reading questions out as we go along. So as something occurs to you, you can go right ahead and ask it. So with that, I'm going to unmute Dr. Mariani. She can introduce herself, and we will get started.
Great. Hi, everyone. So my name is Laura Mariani. I'm a nephrologist that practices at the University of Michigan. I actually see adult patients, not pediatric patients. And I really appreciate Netgear and Abby and Chelsea for putting this together and allowing me to talk to you guys a little bit about clinical trials. Oh, and I did want to mention just before we get started that I am a nephrologist, so I see patients. I also teach in the medical school, but then I do spend a fair amount of time doing clinical research. And some of the studies that I'm involved in include Neptune, CureGN, and then several clinical trials. So, so that's a little bit about my background.
All right, terrific. Let me Oh, sorry, 1 second. All right, Amanda, you should be unmuted now as well. Can you just say hi?
Hi, yep, I just heard.
All right, terrific. So I think we are ready to get going. I just want to give a little bit of an introduction. I know that most of you probably are familiar with Netgear Kidney International, but two things that we wanted to highlight are this Ask the Expert webinar series, and these are occurring all year long. We're going to be doing a whole slew of issues, as you can see. We'd love to have you join us for those, and we're going to be recording them as well, so that you can refer back to them later on, or if you can't attend one, those are going to be on our website and on YouTube as well. So we're excited about that. And another new program that we've started recently is, you can see here these support calls. So we have one set up for patient parents and one set up for adult patients. And those are facilitated by a professional facilitator, but it's just a really informal opportunity for patients and patient parents to get together with others who have been going through the same types of things and talk about, whatever they choose to talk about. So it's a great opportunity. You can learn more about that on our website as well. And I will turn it over to Dr. Mariani and Amanda to talk about what is a clinical trial.
Great, thanks so much. So I guess what we thought we'd do tonight is first just talk about just a little bit about what a clinical trial is, and then talk about kind of all the steps you go through to be able to participate. And as we kind of move through those steps, I'll give you a little bit of background and some questions that probably you should ask your doctor and the research team. And then I'll have Amanda join in and let us know kind of what her experience was on each of those stages of participation. So just to get started, a clinical trial is really one type of clinical research. So I think when most people use the term clinical research, it's really a broad term for any type of study that uses human volunteers or uses data from humans. So data from the medical record, data from blood samples, any kind of data that's been contributed by a person. But a clinical trial is one particular type. So really that's a treatment study. Sometimes people call it an interventional study. And that treatment could be a drug, it could be a device, It could be really any intervention, a diet change, a different type of surgery, all sorts of different things where you're really testing treatment. And usually there's two groups that you're comparing, and those two groups get a different treatment, and we try to figure out which one is more effective. There are lots of other types of clinical research, genetic studies, registries, observational studies, but a clinical trial really refers to an interventional study. And for all those other types of clinical research, Netgear hosted another webinar on clinical research called Demystifying Research, and there's a little video that you can watch if you're interested in some of the other types. Okay, so on our next slide, so we're just talking here about the various steps that you have to take to kind of participate in a clinical trial. So these are the things we're going to talk about, and I'm going to have Amanda chime in with her experience. And obviously, as we move through it, feel free to send any questions or ask me anything else that you like when we're going through these. So the main steps are, first, you have to find a trial, or sometimes the trial will find you, which we'll talk about. The next thing really should be to talk to your doctor. So you want your healthcare team to know what it is you're doing for all aspects of your health, including participating in research. Then we need to find out if you are eligible for that particular study, which we'll talk about how that's determined. And then you need to learn about all the details of the study, what it's going to require from you, and what the researchers are trying to study, and all of those good details about what it actually means to participate. And before you do anything, you'll have to go through a consent process where they really explain all those details to you and make sure that you understand them before you sign up. And then once you're eligible, you've learned everything about the study, you sign the consent form, you follow the protocol of the study, which we'll talk about what that means. Okay, so step one, finding a trial. Okay, so there are some actually really nice resources online where they keep lists of either past, current, or even upcoming clinical trials. One of the most common ones that people search is clinicaltrials.gov. So this is maintained by the National Institutes of Health, but actually they list studies that are funded not only by the government, but also studies that might be funded by industry. So it's a really comprehensive list of studies. And right on the main page, you go there, and in that little search box, you can type anything you want. FSGS, kidney transplant, minimal change disease. If you know the name of a study or the name of a drug, you can type that in. It's really a flexible search, and it'll give you the list of any studies that are either closed, ongoing, or coming up and related to that search term. There's also a bunch of other good information just about clinical trials for patients, for researchers, for doctors. So this is kind of a nice site to go to. The other site that's very helpful is actually Netgear, when they made this clinical studies finder map. And so maybe at the end, if we have extra time, Abby can show you how you navigate it. But basically, it's a map where you can zoom in and out. And if you click on any of those bubbles, it'll tell you the center and the study that's recruiting from that center. And when you scroll down on the page, you can actually find out more details about the particular study. So, you know, this little bubble popped up, but there's more listed below you could click on and get more information. There are a couple other great websites online that that Netgear could fill you in on, or I can tell you a little bit more about. There are some services you can sign up for where you can kind of give your clinical information, and they'll actually email you if a trial fits you in some way. But that's for the, you know, super aggressive searching. Okay, so the other way you may hear about a clinical trial is that the trial might find you. And by what I mean there is either your doctor may already know about a clinical trial. They may send you to another doctor that knows about a clinical trial. Or sometimes clinical settings, hospitals and whatnot, have study coordinators that essentially kind of screen people that are being seen in the nephrology clinic to try to identify people who might be eligible for studies that are ongoing. So at the University of Michigan, for example, we have study coordinators that take a peek at my schedule and say, oh, it looks like you have someone coming in with IgA. They may be eligible for this particular study. Is this something that you want to talk to them about? And I'll often bring it up with the patient, with the study coordinator there as well. So sometimes that's allowed, and that they always check with kind of a institutional review board, which I'll tell you about later, but just to make sure that even if they're looking to see why you're coming into clinic, they aren't reading through your whole chart. Okay, so that's step one. So Amanda, how did you find about the trial that you participated in?
So I found out about the trial actually through Netgear, so one of the options that you mentioned. It was through basically a mass email blast. They were really advertising the duet study, which is the one I participated in. And it was just at a good time for me because I had about run the course of my CELSEP. So I was looking at other options and decided to give it a try.
Great. And do you want to tell people, so I think the Netgear was also able to help you find a center that was enrolling patients that actually wasn't where you get your care, is that right?
Well, so when I was doing it, the only place that was doing the duet study was the University of Michigan. So so that was really the only option at the time. So they did put me in contact with whoever was coordinating the study. And so that, and you know, once I initiated email contact with them, it went from there. I do think they have, you know, after of course I finished, they opened one at the University of Chicago as well. So now there are more options, but at the time that was the only place that was doing it.
Great. Okay. So the next step, after you've found a trial that is potentially relevant to you and your kidneys, is you should talk to your own nephrologist. So I just listed some things that I think you probably should talk to your doctor about. So I think the most important question is really, is this the right time for you and your kidney disease to change therapy? So I think when I talk to my patients about a clinical trial, I have to, both my patient and I have to agree that we're not sure whether one treatment is better than the other. So if I have to be okay no matter what treatment my patient would get in the clinical trial, and my patient has to feel the same way. So if someone's doing really well, they're on a medicine that works for them, they aren't having a lot of side effects, their disease is under good control, that isn't someone that I think necessarily needs to participate in a clinical trial. But if you're running out of options or having therapies that really aren't working or have intolerable side effects, then I think it's a good time to think about what new options there might be. So I think it's really a kind of a personal decision between you and your doctor about whether or not this is the right time. And then your doctor may have lots of information about the actual intervention that's being tested. So a lot of the times when we're trying a new medicine in nephrotic syndrome, it's actually a drug that's been used in other diseases. So oftentimes physicians are used to prescribing those drugs for other reasons, and now we're just applying it to a new disease. And then of course you have to find some information about the logistics. So where might you be able to participate in the trial? How would that work? How could you coordinate it with the care you're getting from your nephrologist and that kind of stuff? And then your doctor may be able to give you a list of questions that when you go to talk to the study personnel, what are some questions that maybe you wouldn't have thought of that your doctor would like to know the answer to before you participate? Okay, and then obviously, you know, you'll keep your doctor informed kind of as you go along and what you decide and kind of what the protocol is and all of that kind of stuff. So Amanda, how did your doctor feel about you trying participating in a trial?
Right. So my doctor was very supportive of it. I actually didn't do these steps quite in this order. I pretty much decided I was going to do the study when I went to see him. But I mean, obviously I wouldn't have done the study if he said no. But you know, I was pretty committed, and it was something I wanted to do. So when I went to him, he was very supportive. He agreed with me. as I mentioned, I'd been on the cell subs probably about 6 months, and nothing was changing. So it was just, I had come to this conclusion, and he agreed that the treatment had run its course, and it was time to try something else. And so we went from there, and I signed up for the study with his. But yeah, he was very supportive, and really thought it was a good idea for me to participate.
Great. Okay. So next step is really to find out if you're eligible. So when people design a clinical trial, they always have these things called inclusion and exclusion criteria. So these are things that help decide who should be in the study and who shouldn't. So inclusion criteria is a list of things that you must have to be able to participate. And exclusion criteria are things you can't have if you want to participate. So the idea behind this is we're trying to find the group of patients who we think this therapy might work. And we're trying to not include patients who we think this therapy has a potential to harm. So that's the idea behind the inclusion and exclusion criteria. Sometimes they're very restrictive. So you can find studies in clinicaltrials.gov where they'll list 25 different criteria because they're trying to be very careful about who we try a therapy that we may or may not know if it works. Sometimes those criteria actually require additional testing. So sometimes they say, okay, it looks like you might be eligible, we need to get this blood test. Or we need to go back and get your kidney biopsy slides and have our pathologist look at them and confirm that, that you're eligible for this study. So sometimes there's actually a visit that's called a screening visit where you come in and they go through all of these criteria and maybe do additional testing. So if you are looking into a study, for example, of FSGS, and you have a diagnosis of FSGS, and you don't meet the criteria for the study, that doesn't mean that your diagnosis was wrong. It just means the criteria are very, very strict and narrow, and so they're not taking everyone with FSGS. So sometimes I think that happens, that people say, oh, does this mean my original diagnosis was wrong? Not at all. It just means the criteria are really strict in this type of study. So on the next page, I'll show you, this is again just a screenshot from that clinicaltrials.gov. So this is a study that's going on at the University of North Carolina, and when you click on a study in clinicaltrials.gov, it lists very clearly what are the inclusion and exclusion criteria, and you'll see this on every clinical trial protocol. So Amanda, do you have anything about that you wanted to comment about this, about eligibility requirements or anything like that?
I don't have too much. It was just when I was participating, it was very clear what the inclusion and exclusion criteria were. So, which I really appreciated because it's good for people to know so they're not kind of wasting their time and applying for something they're not eligible for. So in my case, it was, you needed a confirmed diagnosis of FSGS. You had to have failed, I think, 2 or more treatments and could not be in kidney failure or could not have a kidney transplant. So, so that was good, just knowing kind of right up front that at least met the basis criteria. And then the only thing I had to do to meet that stuff was send in my FSGS diagnosis paperwork, which I actually had. So that was actually pretty easy from my end, maybe not from their end, but it didn't take much time at all to complete that stuff.
Okay, great. All right, good. So, so then once you've sort of gotten over that hurdle where the study team thinks that you might be eligible, then you can really learn kind of all the nitty-gritty details about the study. So I have quite a list of things that you are going to want to find out about your study. So it's on 3 slides here, but I'll just go through them kind of quickly, and people can ask more questions later if they have them. So the first thing I want to know when I'm learning about a study, even as a physician, I want to know what is the question the study is trying to answer. So it would seem that all clinical trials are just trying to decide which treatment is better, but actually that's not always the case. So there are some clinical trials where what they're trying to find out is, does this brand new medication even work the way we think it's going to work? Does it even affect the particular part of the body we think it's going to affect? And sometimes they're trying to find a dose. Sometimes they're trying to decide, is this medication even safe to give to people for the first time after we've tried it in the animals? So the question may be very different. And so here's a list of some of the questions that the study might be trying to answer. And I think that's a good thing to know going in. Am I participating in a study that all we're looking at is how well does the body clear this drug after I take a dose? And that's really different than saying, is this actually treating my disease? Then you want to know everything you can about the particular drug or device or intervention that they want to do. So has it only been tested in animals? Has it been tested in people? Has it been approved in people and used for other diseases? And all the known potential risks and potential benefits. And then you want to know, how are they going to decide which groups get which treatment? So there are some very small studies, like I said, where they're just trying to look for side effects or how well the body clears the drug, where everyone who participates is going to get the same treatment. But there are other trials where people are going to get sort of assigned to different treatments, sometimes just by chance, essentially a flip of the coin. And sometimes that's a coin that has two sides, and sometimes that's a coin that could have more than two sides. So, so you want to know, is it going to be assigned by chance? Is everyone getting the same thing? Do two people get the treatment for every one person that doesn't? Or how is that going to happen? Okay, so that's kind of some general about what question they're trying to answer and how you're going to get which treatment. On the next slide, then you want to know kind of what they're going to ask you to do. So, so really, what are the tests? What are, if any, are the procedures? And then what are the study visits going to be like? So do they need to see you in person? How long might each visit be? Will any of the visits require, for example, an overnight stay in the hospital? And then what sort of blood tests or urine tests or genetic tests are they going to do on any samples that you give to the study team? So you want to know everything that's going to happen during the study, and then also at the end. So when the study's over, they usually have a period of time where you're going to be in the study. When it's over, what happens at the end? Can you continue the treatment? Are they going to tell you the results? Sort of what other information or opportunities will you have at the end of the study? And lastly, I think it's really important to know kind of who's sponsoring the study and who's running the study. So many different groups can pay for a clinical trial. So certainly pharmaceutical companies pay for trials, federal agencies like the NIH and the Department of Defense. Individual researchers can get money from their own institution to run clinical trials. And then certainly the American Heart Association and various other patient advocacy groups and whatnot sometimes have enough money where they can fund clinical trials. So I think it's just important to know who's actually paying for it and how that may or may not influence kind of decisions about how the study was designed and what research has gone into it beforehand. And that who's paying for it may be very different than who's running the study. So the people who are running the study, I've just listed them here. So you have a principal investigator. That's really the person overseeing the study. So they make sure the data is collected appropriately. They're watching for any safety signals. They're making sure that people are able to do the protocol that was designed. And they're ultimately responsible for all of the results and the completion of the study. At each site that's enrolling patients, there may be other people who are investigators. So they often are under the supervision of the principal investigator. They often call them co-investigators. They're usually also physicians who are seeing patients for study visits. And then finally, there are study coordinators. So these are really the people that really accomplish a clinical trial in my mind. So our coordinators at Michigan are wonderful. They keep me organized and our patients organized, and they make all the appointments, they collect all the data, they help make sure we're collecting the right blood and urine, and they document everything. And they're really your point of contact with the study. They're available all the time, and they sort of keep everything organized. So, so those are some of the things that I think you should ask when you're learning about the study. So, Amanda, it sounds like you did a lot of work on your own to kind of learn about the study. When you sat down with a coordinator and kind of learned about it, how did that go, and did you learn anything new?
Great. So, yeah, the study that I participated in really touched on all these points. I'd say it was about half and half. So half I kind of knew coming in before I even sat down with the study coordinator for the first time, and particularly that part you said about, what kind of study it was. And I knew, before I even sent out that first email, that the drug that I was going to be taking had previously been used in diabetic patients. And, so they were now going to see if it was applicable to FSGS patients in this study. So that gave me, kind of a boost of confidence as far as the safety of the drug, because it had already been tested on others first. And so, they were just kind of seeing if it was applicable to our situation. And then when I sat down with the study coordinator, she answered, pretty much the remaining of these questions that I didn't even know to ask when I was there. But she covered who was sponsoring the study, and it was a drug company, basically saying if the drug they had designed would also work for kidney patients, and disclose who all the people that were going to be participating. And yeah, I would just emphasize again that the study coordinators are really really important, and it's really important to have a good relationship with them, because they just they're really good at putting you at ease. Oh, and also the practical implications that you touched on were really our main concerns. And, that's something I learned more about when I actually talked to the coordinator for the first time, as far as how much of participation would be required, as far as getting a schedule for when I would have to come for visits, everything like that. But that was definitely one of my main concerns before participating in the study, was how it was going to impact just my schedule and my day-to-day and everything like that.
Great. Okay. So, so next, after you've kind of had this meeting with the study coordinator, you've gone through all the inclusion exclusion criteria, you've learned everything you need to know, then there's a true formal consent process. And this is a physical paper that your coordinator will walk you through, but basically all those questions I listed should be laid out explicitly in this consent form, and they'll walk you through it sort of line by line. And here's just kind of a big list of things that are supposed to be in a consent form: why you're doing the study, who's sponsoring it, who's running it. Importantly, it has to list contact information, so it always has the contact information for people at the site. And then they really have to be clear about what are any risks that we have even thought about that might be relevant to this study. What are any potential benefits? What are the alternatives to participating? And then sort of how they're going to protect you. So how they're going to protect your confidentiality, and how, if anything bad happens, how the study will protect you. So so all that stuff is laid out. It's a huge document, and then you have to sort of sign at the end. And sometimes there's, depending on the study, there may be several things that you have to consent to if you aren't going to do all of the study. So Amanda, how is your consent document?
Right. So like you mentioned, it was a big I think mine was 16 pages of information. The study coordinator, again, went through it kind of page by page with me, so really make sure I understood everything, which is great. I did have, so before I could even get to that point, I think I had to sign a HIPAA consent form, so my records could be released. And there was another, they also asked me if I wanted to contribute to genetic testing, or if I wanted my samples to also be genetically tested for additional research. So I think ultimately there were 3 consents I signed, but the big one was the 16-page document, which took a while to get through, but by the end, all that information was covered.
Great, good. All right, so one thing I wanted to remind you on the next slide was really, you sign the consent form at the beginning, but really that you can take away that consent at any time. So, your participation is voluntary throughout the study. So if something happens and you just can't do the study anymore, you can always withdraw your consent. So, and we all know that. And, your study team, they're responsible to keep you safe, and you're volunteering, and we appreciate it. And so, so you can always change your mind. Okay, so after the consent, then you're enrolled in the study. And I sort of just put together a glossary of terms that might help you when they're talking about a protocol. So all the protocol means is the inclusion-exclusion criteria, and then what are the things that are going to happen in the trial. And there's lots of different ways that clinical trials can be conducted. So these are some commonly used terms when people are describing a clinical trial. So I'll just pick out a couple. The first is whether or not you know what treatment you're getting. So that refers to the double blind and the open label. So open label means everyone, the study team, people participating, everyone knows who got which treatment. This is always true when the treatment is something that's like a device or something that you can see, right? You can't, if it's plasmapheresis, that's a procedure that the other group knows if they're not getting that procedure. But it can be the same with medications too. If you know which drug you're getting, then it's open label. If neither you nor your study team knows if you're getting the active drug, that's called a double-blind study. Randomization we talked about, that refers to how you decide which group gets which treatment. So randomization means it's a flip of the coin who gets which treatment. And then there's a couple different options about when the treatment is given. So this sometimes will be referred to as a run-in period or a washout period. So basically when the study starts, everyone will get the same treatment, and then people will be assigned to different treatments. That's a run-in period. Sometimes at the other end, the same thing happens. You get randomized to which treatment group, and at the end, everyone stops their treatment, and we continue to follow patients. So that's a washout period. These are just some terms that you might hear when they're trying to explain to you not only what you will do, but sort of what everyone in the whole study is doing. Okay, next is some other terms you might hear for drug trials. So, so these are terms that the FDA came up with, and basically when the FDA approves a drug, the group that is bringing that drug to the FDA has to show that the drug is safe and it's effective. And so they move through these different phases to prove those things. So phase 1 is a really small number of patients. It's often the first time a drug is being tried in people. So there's usually extensive experience in different animals, but then they have to eventually try it in a person. And they try very small number, often healthy people, but it's a phase 1 trial, and the focus is really just on safety. So it's not really looking at it, does it treat any disease? It's just, is this a safe compound to give to people? Phase 2 is a little bit bigger. This time they're looking at dose, so what might be the best dose, and they start to look a little bit, is the medication that we're giving treating the thing that we think we're trying to target? And then phase 3, I think, is the big clinical trial that everyone typically thinks of. This is the largest group of people where half of them get the treatment, half get this sort of comparison treatment, and we try to decide which one is better. So, so you may hear those terms, the phase 1, 2, and 3 trial, and that's what they're referring to. Okay. And the last thing I just wanted to say, like, as you're participating and going through study visits and procedures and all that kind of stuff, the study team is really there to help you. So they're there to answer any question you have. They're there to remind you. They're there to be your support. And I want to emphasize that really any new symptom that you have, if you're being a part of a clinical trial, you got to let your study coordinator know. Even if you think it's completely unrelated, if it's a usual cold, just let your study coordinator know. They're going to be your best friend during this trial. And it's because we really are trying very hard to make sure people are safe. And we actually have multiple other independent groups that watch clinical trials to make sure they're safe. So the first is an institutional review board. So any protocol that gets developed for any clinical research, not just clinical trials, gets reviewed by one of these boards. And they're completely independent from the research team. They're typically a group of not only researchers, but statisticians, members of the community, other doctors, patients even sometimes, and they read through the protocol and say, yeah, you convinced us that this looks like you've thought of all the potential risks and benefits to the patients, and we think it's okay for you to do this study. And then as the study is going along, there's a different independent group called the Data Safety and Monitoring Board, which watches the results and any potential reactions. So all those little things, those little symptoms that you may think are related or not related, those get reported both to the IRB and a DSMB. So these are people, it's their job to make sure that people participating in clinical research are safe. And they aren't involved in the research. They have no vested interest in how the trial comes out. They just want people to be protected. So feel free to use your study team to ask questions, tell them everything, and know that there are independent people that are watching and making sure it's safe. Okay. So Amanda, tell me a little bit about like study visits and how it went. And
Sure. So initially there were, well, at first there was the first 3 weeks I had to go once a week because there was a washout period, which I think is different than, or maybe it's the same washout period you discussed, where I had to stop all the current medication that I was on, like including my blood pressure medication, everything like that. So because that might interfere with the new drug that I was taking. So I had to go and do that, and then I had to take a visit where I actually took the drug, and that was an overnight visit, which you mentioned, like some studies require. So like that was an overnight visit, and then the week after that I had to come in for a checkup just to make sure that everything was going fine. Then after that, it was about once a month I would come in for a checkup, and then towards the end, it was only once every 2 months. And I did 2 overnight visits, one when I first got the drug, and then another visit 8 weeks later. And one of the great things that I really appreciated was that I was able to come in on the weekends a lot, because just with my job, I didn't have a lot of vacation time. So they really did accommodate me as far as weekend visits go. And then there were only a couple of times I had to come in during the week. The first was for the overnight visits, and the second was they had to do an echo, and they couldn't do the echoes on the weekends. But overall, it was a very positive experience. Everyone treated you very nice. And the other thing that I think is important to mention is that I live in Chicago, and the study was at the University of Michigan, so they paid for all my travel while I was out there. If I had to stay overnight, they paid for a hotel room, and so the only thing I had to pay for out of pocket was for meals, but even then you got a small stipend for your visits, so that basically covered your meals out. So, I mean, it didn't cost me anything, except time, and even then they were pretty aware and accommodating of my time and my schedule.
Great, yeah, and so don't be shy about asking for what you need, right? If part
right, exactly. I mean, yeah, because we also travel a lot. My husband and I travel a lot, so I wanted to make sure that wouldn't interfere with our travel schedule and our trips, and also, like I said, my work was and is you're pretty demanding, so I wanted to make sure I'd be able to work around that as well.
Yeah, and I think this is a real issue in rare diseases where patients are really spread out, and they're to really do a clinical trial, often people are going to have to travel, and the researchers and the study teams know that. So don't be shy about asking for what it is you need to be able to participate. Okay, good. So I think that's almost the end of what we were going to talk about. Abby, did you have one more thing about sort of stuff that Netgear is doing for clinical trials, or do you want me to take some questions, or up to you?
Yeah, let me just do a little bit. You have already mentioned the clinical trial finder on our website. We try to keep that as updated as possible, but by all means, if you come across a trial that's not on there, let us know and we can add it. We have made it searchable, so I think I can actually show you how to use that. Here's the website, and if you go to netgear.org, it's under the Research tab under Participate in Research, and there's this little filter by menu that you can pull down. So if you're looking only for adult studies or pediatric studies, you can narrow down that way. It'll repopulate the map with just those studies that apply to you. And if you're looking for specific to any specific disease, minimal change, membranous nephropathy, nephrotic syndrome in general, studies that accept transplant recipients, you can narrow down by any of those. It's also really helpful to zoom in, especially because at a place like, say, the University of Michigan, there are so many studies going on at any one time that it's very helpful to zoom in as far as you can into the map, and you'll see more options that way. Another way to do it, in case you're struggling with the map or you're looking in Ann Arbor where there's 30 studies at once, you can scroll down here, and we've kind of narrowed it by condition and age. You've got the title, the goal of the trial, briefly to give you, in case that's something that you're interested in, and then contact info for somebody to talk to. And these are not only clinical trials. We do also have general research studies on here as well. But for example, if you want to click on Duet, we've got a little page where it's broken out with some more general information for you, and then a list of the sites. So that's another way to look at it as well. And I will just come back on here. And the other thing I wanted to bring up is the Netgear Kidney Network. Oops. And that is our patient registry. And so we are working on getting all of the nephrotic syndrome patients that we can into the registry, in part to share your data with researchers. And the other part of that that's huge for us is being able to let you know in a very particular way about what studies might be available for you. So that's one of the questions that you're asked in the surveys when you complete the registry. Are you interested in hearing about potential studies that you might be eligible for? If you click that box, we will let you know when a new study opens up near you that you might fit the basic criteria for. And then the other portion I wanted to mention is the Netgear Accelerating Cures Institute, which is a new project that we are doing in tandem with the University of Michigan. And we could have a whole webinar just about NACI, as we call it, but the goal of NACI is to make sure that clinical trials for nephrotic syndrome are efficient, that they have patient goals in mind, that the design of those trials is the best for our patients, and we want to make the whole process just a little bit faster so that we can bring cures and better treatments to you all. So I think that we must have exhausted all of the questions that anybody had. Some of them were answered as we went along, which was great. Does anybody have any questions here at the end? Or Laura or Amanda, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
I mean, I think this really covered it. I mean, like I said, everyone that I worked with there was really great. I mean, it was a very positive experience overall. I would definitely do it again. You know, if a trial came along that I was eligible for. And I mean, the main reason I did it was obviously to find a cure for me. But also I think it's important just for FSGS patients in general to participate because there's so few of us, and the more research and data that everyone has that these researchers have, I mean, that's going to help everyone overall. So I think participation is really important.
All right, great. We did have a question, actually. So the question is, do you get to keep taking the medicine after the trial if it works for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the short answer is it depends on the study. So oftentimes there is an option to continue, but not always. So if the initial study, like I said, was designed really to look at dose and safety and that kind of stuff, often they won't let people continue on the study indefinitely. But in a lot of cases, that's not true, and that you can stay on it. Similarly, there are often studies that are designed where people who get randomized to placebo, so basically at the end of the study, they find out actually they were in the group that wasn't getting the drug. Oftentimes there's an option for them to switch to the active drug if the study found that that drug seemed like it was having effect. So those are good questions to ask. It's all just how the protocol was designed.
That actually reminds me of another question that we get asked sometimes. What happens if you've stopped taking whatever medication you had been taking, and then you start to have problems? I know that some studies may allow you to then take the test drug. How common is that?
Yeah, again, it's kind of just depends on the protocol. So always you'll have the option to stop and go back to what you were taking before. So if you and your doctor say, you know what, actually things look like they've gotten worse, we need to go back to what we were doing, you can always do that. Usually they don't, so you can always stop the drug if you're on it. If you're in the placebo, usually they don't let you switch to the active arm until they kind of know what's going to happen to the study at the long term. So I don't know if that totally answered your question, but you can always stop and go back to what you were on. And often they let your doctor and you continue to make decisions about any other medications you're on as long as it doesn't interact with the drug they're testing. There is a type of clinical trial called a pragmatic trial, which is kind of becoming more common. And the idea is that is a much less restrictive protocol. So they kind of just randomize people to a therapy and then let the clinicians and the patients sort of do what they would normally do. So there's less strict inclusion-exclusion criteria, there's less protocols, there's less visits. I think we're going to start to see those kind of trials a little bit more often. They're supposed to be kind of a little bit more real-world setting.
Perfect. And then another question that we get asked fairly frequently, say you find a trial that you're interested in, you take it to your doctor, and maybe your doctor is not at one of these like larger medical centers, or they're not very aware of trials that are going on. What's the best way to get that information across to them? And what kind of recourse do you have if they're not interested, or they don't think that maybe you should be pursuing it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, this happens sometimes in rare diseases that, you may be one of very few patients that your nephrologist has with your specific disease, and certainly with your disease that's had your own disease course. So I think what's nice about the clinical trials, like I said, it's really easy to get in touch with the people running the study. And so you can always reach out to them directly, and we often have materials that are designed specifically for other clinicians. So a lot more of the scientific data and background and brochures that are targeted at physicians. So you can always ask the study team, what materials do you have, or would you be willing to talk to my physician? And I guarantee they would.
All right, terrific. Well, I think that's all the questions that we've gotten. don't know if anybody has anything else to add, but I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. This is a topic that I think is super interesting, so I'm glad to see so many others agree. And I want to thank Dr. Mariani and Amanda. Very, very helpful. And we will be posting this recording, so if you want to come back and take a look at some of the slides and get down some of those questions, you're welcome to do that. And I would love to hear your feedback, so feel free to give me send me an email. My email is there at the bottom, aswan@netgear.org. You can also give me a call. If you think of any questions later on, feel free to follow up. I can pass them along to Amanda or Dr. Mariani, and I'm sure they'd be happy to answer. So,
of course.
I would say good